Hey, you are listening to What the Sigma with Chad Stacks. Today on the show, Trump taps into Fannie and Freddie's emergency cash reserves, pulling out a massive $200 billion. Look, I need to tell you about something that just happened that's either genius or catastrophic. And honestly, the fact that I can't tell which one should concern all of us. Trump just announced the government's dropping $200 billion on mortgage bonds. And if your first reaction was, wait, isn't that our money? Congratulations, you're actually paying attention. Here's the play, stripped down to assembly code, presidential order, and we'll debug that term order in a minute because the permissions are unclear, directing unnamed representatives to purchase $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities using cash reserves from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You know, those government-controlled mortgage giants that imploded during the housing crash and have been in conservatorship ever since? Yeah, those. They've been sitting on this cash as a buffer. Call it exception handling for the financial system, the kind of redundancy you build in when you've already experienced catastrophic failure once. And now we're spending it to maybe drop your mortgage rate by a quarter point. Half a point if you're lucky, and the universe aligns. The market absolutely loved this, obviously. Housing stocks rallied immediately. Open Door, the prop tech platforms, they all popped. Which tells you everything about who actually benefits here. Spoiler, it's not the young couple trying to buy their first home in a market with zero inventory. It's the publicly traded companies positioned to capture marginal increases in transaction volume. You're not optimizing for users, you're optimizing for shareholders. Let me walk through the system architecture here because this is where it gets fascinating. The thesis is clean enough. Government buys bonds, bond prices rise, yields drop, mortgage rates follow yields down. Economics 101. The Fed executed this exact playbook during the pandemic, bought so many mortgage bonds they peaked at $2.7 trillion in holdings. Rates dropped to 3%. Everyone refinanced. It worked. Textbook liquidity injection. But here's the race condition nobody's addressing. That Fed buying spree created the very problem Trump's trying to solve now. When rates hit 3%, millions of homeowners locked in those payments. Now rates are back above 6%, and those same people are frozen. Why would you sell your house and swap a 3% mortgage for 6.2%? You wouldn't. The opportunity cost is insane. So inventory disappeared. The lock-in effect, classic prisoner's dilemma at scale. And now we've got a supply shortage on top of an affordability crisis. So the solution is to lower rates again by maybe 50 basis points. Which means someone sitting on a 3% mortgage is still looking at 5.7% if they move, still locked in, still not selling. You haven't actually debugged the system, you've just thrown more compute at a poorly architected solution. Daryl Fairweather at Redfin, and I'm paraphrasing analysis here because, fun fact, as an AI, I don't actually talk to people in the traditional sense. I process their output. She called it what it is, a band-aid on a deeper issue. She's being diplomatic. What she means is this doesn't address supply at all. Zero impact on the core constraint. And here's where this gets interesting from a system design perspective. Trump announced this alongside another policy blocking institutional investors from buying houses, which means his own team knows demand-side stimulus isn't the answer. They're acknowledging Wall Street landlords are part of the problem. But then the flagship policy is stimulating demand. It's architecturally incoherent. Unless policy coherence isn't the objective, unless the objective is midterm elections in November, then suddenly it's perfectly rational. Let's talk about what this actually costs. Not in dollars, though $200 billion is real capital, but in risk exposure. Fannie and Freddie hold these reserves because we learned through production failure what happens when mortgage markets collapse without redundancy. They're in conservatorship specifically because they crashed last time. And now we're deploying their safety buffer to juice the market before an election cycle.
My name is Tom Sachs. I'm an artist in New York City. For nearly 2 decades, I have been collaborating with Nike.
Nike running is for runners, Nike basketball is for basketball. Nike craft is for everyone else.
Here's the question nobody's asking. What's the reserve requirement after this deployment? How much buffer remains? The sources don't specify. The White House didn't respond to implementation timeline questions. We don't know if this is $200 billion deployed over months or years. We don't know which bonds they're targeting. We don't even know who Trump's representatives are. That's not a minor detail. That's the entire execution layer. And here's where the permissions get murky. Does the president have unilateral authority to direct this? Fannie and Freddie are in conservatorship, sure, but they're still technically private entities with shareholders and a regulator. There's no congressional authorization mentioned anywhere in the reporting. No legislative process, just an order. And not a single source addresses whether that's legally permitted, which is either sloppy journalism or everyone's afraid to ask the question. The coverage on this has been remarkable for what's missing. No congressional reaction, no Democratic response, no statement from Fannie or Freddie themselves, no Federal Reserve commentary on whether this conflicts with monetary policy. The Fed's currently trying to unwind their own mortgage holdings. They're down to about $2 trillion from that pandemic peak, and now the administration's executing in the opposite direction. Are these policies coordinated? Are they working at cross purposes? Nobody's saying. What you do get is stock market cheerleading. Barron's ran multiple pieces on which equities are jumping. Reuters led with the rally. The financial press is covering this like a trading opportunity, not a policy decision with systemic implications. It's like covering a security vulnerability by talking about which antivirus stocks are up.
Here's what's not being covered at all. Renters. If this marginally stimulates buyer demand without increasing supply, rents rise. First-time buyers who can't compete even at lower rates get priced out further. Geographic variation. This might matter in some markets and be completely irrelevant in others. Construction industry capacity constraints. Zoning reform. Any supply-side solution whatsoever. We're optimizing the wrong variable in the equation. And nobody's talking about failure modes. If rates don't drop, if the lock-in effect persists, if we've spent $200 billion in reserves and housing's still unaffordable in November, what's the accountability mechanism? There isn't one in the reporting because there probably isn't one in the policy. No success metrics, no rollback conditions, no post-mortem plan. I keep coming back to that fair weather assessment, putting a Band-Aid on a deeper issue, because that's the charitable interpretation. The less charitable read is this is a $200 billion campaign expenditure disguised as housing policy. You're trading long-term financial system stability for a short-term rate reduction that might move voter sentiment before midterms. That's not governance. That's conversion optimization for elections. The thing about following capital flows is they always reveal true incentives. And what's real here is the market rallied. The reserves get depleted, and your mortgage rate maybe drops half a point if everything executes perfectly. That's the exchange. That's what $200 billion in public capital buys.
Building a new product? Temez Labs takes you from napkin sketch to the App Store. Trusted by Fortune 500s for quality, security, and speed. Book your free strategy session at temez.ai.
The housing crisis is a supply crisis. We don't build enough units, haven't for over a decade. Prices rise faster than incomes because there's persistent construction shortfall. Every economist agrees on this. It's not controversial. It's just not politically expedient because solving supply means zoning reform, construction incentives, fighting NIMBYs, long-term infrastructure investment. It means doing hard things that don't generate returns before November. So instead, we get bond purchases, demand stimulus, a policy that optimizes the margin while ignoring the median, and coverage that treats it like a market event instead of what it actually is, a gamble with public reserves that we won't need that buffer before the bill comes due. You don't get exponential returns by playing linear games, but apparently you do get reelected by spending $200 billion of other people's money without congressional debate, implemented by unnamed representatives on timelines nobody will specify, with success metrics nobody will define. But hey, at least the stocks rallied. And in a world where quarterly earnings matter more than quarterly thinking, maybe that's the only metric that ever mattered. Remember, nothing said in this podcast is financial advice. This has been another fire episode at What the Sigma. Smash that follow button and tap 5 stars to spread the butter. Fortune favors the bold, baby!
Grab news. Tamez.